Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bird Bombs, helpful bursts of ID info. And tonight we're going to be talking about Yellowlegs sandpipers. I'm David Suddjian, and Bird Bombs is brought to you by the Denver Field Ornithologists. Bird Bombs is a 30-minute burst of info on a focused topic. So I'll give my talk, and in there we'll have some quizzes that'll be fun and a little challenging. Not too hard tonight, maybe, but we'll see. And you'll also have an opportunity for questions and answers. So use that Q&A feature. DFO field trip leader Laura Stedman is assisting tonight in having a look at the questions as they come in, and she'll present some to me at the end. So let's talk about sandpiper identification. We're in late summer now in Colorado, and that means we're heading into the peak of our fall shorebird migration. It's a very exciting time because you can see a lot of cool birds, and there's a lot of variety out there and some rare ones. We're already having a pretty good season here. But it's also a very challenging time for a lot of birders, sometimes even an overwhelming time. So let's kind of sort through it. We can sort it out together. So shorebirding presents a lot of challenges just by virtue of what we're dealing with. So we have limited study opportunities. We only encounter these birds during certain windows of the year, and we have to go out of our way to really see them and to study them. And many species are possible, and there's several of them are quite similar, so we have a lot of variety to deal with. They tend to live out in inaccessible spots, hundreds of yards distance, Colorado-style water birding. Shorebirds are small, and they're difficult to see the details at a distance, and they have a complex variety of plumages. Not only adult, but adult breeding and non-breeding. And then we have juveniles, which is a predominant feature of the shorebirds we have moving into late summer. And then they're also molting, so we encounter them in between plumages. So there's a lot to deal with in how they appear. So some tips to think about. A spotting scope is really helpful to enjoy and study shorebirds. You can't really get too far in starting out without having some kind of optical aid that's a little more serious than binoculars in most situations. So consider the lighting when you're planning to go out somewhere. Make sure you're going to have the light to your side or hopefully to your back. Avoid kind of having birds backlit. It just makes it that much harder. And go out to where there are lots of shorebirds. So don't miss the season. So right now, the place you can find some along our front range areas that have shorebird habitat, but getting out onto the prairie to key reservoirs can be an important way to really encounter a lot of shorebirds. Pruitt Reservoir, Jackson Lake State Park are two that are happening right now. So an expert approach to shorebird ID considers a number of factors kind of instantaneously, many of which are not plumage details. So the experienced observer considers always as a framework status and distribution, knowing what to expect, when and where, and that can help us figure out, when to think about finding a short-billed dowitcher, for example. We also are concerned about relative size. With just knowing what to expect when and where and having some sense of the size of the bird, you can identify any shorebird. Relative size is critical. The structure of the birds is unique among the different species. Look at their proportions, the bill size and shape, color of the bill. Well, that's not really structure, but the leg length, those kind of features are unique among the different species and can be assessed in all kinds of different circumstances, from far away to poor lighting and so on. So these birds are occurring somewhere and doing something, and that's usually information that's going to resolve an ID for you, or certainly could, like these Phalaropes with their characteristic swimming foraging behavior, or the way the spotted sandpiper bobs its rear end up and down. These are behavioral or habitat features that are helping us to resolve our ID. And the shorebirds talk a lot, so train your ear to pay attention to what's going on. Some of the calls are very distinctive and catch your ear. Some of them are a little more subtle and maybe not recognized right away, but you'll know when the greater yellowlegs is calling in the neighborhood. All right, so these sorts of features are less variable than the plumage features. That's why they're really helpful to consider. We also want to use reference species or a reference something. So one of the neat things about shorebirds is that they're often around with other kinds of birds. And one of the kinds of birds that's always around when you're looking at sandpipers pretty much all the time is the killdeer. And so that's a great reference species. They're ubiquitous and they're kind of mid-range in the smaller sandpiper size range. So they make a great comparison, often present. Baird sandpiper is another by virtue of being very numerous and a good one to use as a sorting tool to find other things. Even inanimate objects can be useful. For example, those Pepsi cans behind that sandpiper are clearly smaller than it. I'd say the Pepsi can is sort of in the ballpark of a killdeer size, and this is a lot bigger, so I'm going to go with the greater yellowlegs on this guy. Sometimes a size comparison like geese with the yellowlegs isn't helpful, but you get those kind of things too. So tonight we're focused on the family Scolopacidae, the sandpipers, phalaropes, and allies. And there are 43 different species that are regular in the USA. And here in Colorado, we have 23 species that are regular, meaning you can find them without breaking your neck. And there's some other annual rarities and others that are rare still. So we have many different sandpipers to look at. We're going to focus just on 7 of them. I've listed here the stilt, long-billed dowitcher, spotted sandpiper, solitary, lesser and greater yellowlegs, and Wilson's phalarope. You can see that 3 of these, the solitary and the 2 yellowlegs, are in the same genus, and so that's going to help us see a little similarity there with the solitary sandpiper. Otherwise, they're in different genera. There are some other regular yellowleg species. We won't spend much time with them tonight. The upland sandpiper, which we don't see too much in migration, kind of hard to encounter. Pectoral and least sandpiper we'll deal with in our next bird bombs. And Wilson snipe is distinctive. And we will talk a little bit about the short-billed dowitcher. So before we go any further, let's take a brief look at a few graphs and see what we can learn from these. Let me just move my bar out of the way here. Okay, so these are showing us abundance. Oops, sorry about that, everyone. Showing us abundance of several species. The greater yellowlegs is common between the 2 graphs. What you can notice is that the fall migration is a lot more protracted than the spring migration. Fall migration, looking at the right-hand graph, kind of spans about a 4-month period, where spring migration is really just about 5 weeks for the heart of it, 5 to 6 weeks. So fall takes a lot longer, and birds occur at different times. These different species, the Wilson's phalarope peaking about now, an earlier migrant, the stilt sandpiper still building up in numbers, long-billed dowitcher is a later migrant. We can also see that the numbers vary a lot. The lesser yellowlegs is considerably more common than the greater yellowlegs. So these kind of things help give us some perspective. It's important to understand that there is a timing to the season, but we won't spend too much more time with that tonight. So we have yellowlegs, but then what? So here's our 7 species. You can actually identify all of them pretty readily just from these pictures, even though it seems like I've chopped off the most important parts. But the clues are all still there. They're all commonly have a yellow or yellowish legs, but that's not going to get us to any of our particular IDs on these. So what we can do is start to have a little focus on these, and we'll see that we have 2 yellowlegs. And the yellowlegs are generally the bigger out of this group, and they stand taller, and you'll see that they are kind of spangled above with blackish and white and gray, and a lot of white spotting. So they have very patterned upper parts with those kind of 3 tones, and definitely a lot of spangled appearance. And they have various plumage features that are similar between the 2 species, and we're not going to worry anymore about those. But we'll notice that their bill shapes and colors are a little different, and we'll get more into that. 2 other species, the solitary sandpiper and the spotted sandpiper. So these are stepping down a bit in size, and you can see the similarity in that solitary maybe to those yellowlegs and his overall shape and kind of impression. Remember, they're in the same genus, Tringa. The solitary is dark above. It has this nice spotting pattern, but it's much more finely marked without as much spangling kind of appearance as the yellowleg species. It's a little more horizontal than they are. And notice that big prominent eye ring. The bill isn't straight like on the lesser yellowlegs, but it has a little droop to it. And his legs are a little bit greenish, not as bright. So there's some other features we'll look a little more at when we get to further into the solitary. And the spotted sandpiper is distinct because it has a unique bobbing of its rear end behavior among our sandpipers here. A lot of them do different movement. It's the only one that wags its rear end up and down all the time. This is a young one with a nice barring on the wings. And it's kind of a brownish above. It's a horizontal bird. And notice the prominence of the kind of broken eye ring and the eye line and supercilium, that line over the eye, whereas on the solitary, it's really the eye ring that's standing out for us. So continuing down, we have a stilt sandpiper and the long-billed dowitcher. So look at that stilt sandpiper up on his long yellow stilts. They have a funny way of kind of leaning forward, kind of pot-bellied, tipped forward. They have a long bill, not too long compared to the long-billed Dowitcher, but it is longish and it droops slightly at its narrowing tip. And they have a kind of funny fuzzy-headed look, the stilt sandpiper. It's one of our most common sandpipers that we have during the fall migration. So it's one to get used to, especially if you get out on the prairie. The Dowitchers are plumper, chunkier birds with long bills, and they have their characteristic feeding motion with the bill down in the water a lot, like a sewing machine. So our last species, the Wilson's Phalarope, a little different yet. Notice how pale it looks. Notice how it has kind of a white face and a very fine, needly bill. It's kind of portly looking, but elegant in its way, but a little bit oddly proportioned. All right, so size does matter in our sandpiper ID. Bigger, smaller, shorter, taller, these are things we want to see. So I put a little scale in here of median length just to kind of give us some approximate kind of ranking of size and see how things fall out. We see the greater clearly as the larger of our focal species. The long-billed is ranked in there with the lesser, even though it doesn't stand as tall, it is has its length. So they're a little bit bigger. And then we are moving down the scale with the Wilson's Phalarope and the stilt sandpiper, and then to the two smaller species, the solitary and the spotted. And some reference species on the side to kind of give some size comparison. You see the killdeer falling in the middle there, a little bit smaller generally than the lesser yellowlegs, say bigger than the Wilsons or stilt sandpiper. So we can compare some of these directly in the pictures and see what we can see here in the lower left, for example, with the lesser yellowlegs is a little bit bigger than this stilt sandpiper. Okay, so just looking at the size, and then if we look at the shapes of the birds, it'll take us farther. But let's just look at the size. Here we have our handy dandy reference killdeer in here, with the lesser yellowlegs a little bit bigger, but not towering over it like a greater yellowlegs would, and the solitary sandpiper here a little bit smaller. Here's a greater yellowleg towering over this little sandpiper, which honestly I'm not totally sure what that is. I think a least sandpiper, but really big size difference there. And you can see, of course, the two yellowlegs together, and we'll look more at that great picture in a little bit. So kind of moving down the scale, again, that lesser yellowlegs, a little bit bigger than the killdeer, and again over here in the upper right. And then with these solitary sandpipers, a little bit smaller than the killdeer. So the killdeer is functioning as a nice reference. Sometimes the size difference is extreme, like between this avocet and least sandpiper with our stilt sandpiper in between. So size does matter. Uh-oh, we're going to go right to a quiz. And this is going to be a two-part quiz, and I'm not going to use the polling feature like we did before. We're just going to let you look at it and make your decision, and I'll talk us through it. So we're going to start with the first half of this quiz, and it's going to be the right-hand part of the picture. Don't worry about those birds on the left. So we have three birds here on the right side, and I'll just cut to the chase. We have two different species. So what can you see? What do you think we have? So we have one that's a little bit bigger than the other two. One is kind of marked somewhat heavily with pale spots above, and it has a straight bill, and the bill is maybe similar in size to the head. We're not going to worry about that. Now, granted, I didn't go into many details, so we'll see where we're at. The other two are smaller. They have a prominent eyebrow, and the bill is kind of longish with a little bit of a droop. And they're okay. So what do we think we have there? We have a lesser yellowlegs and two stilt sandpipers. Okay, so let's look at our second half of the picture here. Now this is tricky. Again, we have two species. One of them should now be easy. The other one, you might be thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not sure because I haven't seen that yet tonight. And indeed, here we have a stilt sandpiper on the left with two bared sandpipers. So we haven't looked into any detail on bears, and we won't spend any more time with them tonight, but that is one of our reference species. And as we bring in some of the smaller shorebirds yet into the mix, having the bairds in there with the stilt and mixing it in with the other small ones, it really is a valuable reference point. So let's take a look at some of the heads and bills and shapes of some of these birds. Love this picture on the right by Mark Amershek of the two yellowlegs together with the greater on the left. You can see a lot of important details. One is that the greater yellowlegs has a longer bill, and it has a pale base with a little bit of an upsweep to it. The lesser yellowlegs has a straight black bill with no upsweep. The greater yellowlegs bill is clearly longer than the depth of the head. Now, sometimes that's a little hard to evaluate, and there's a little variation in bill size, so sometimes that's hard to, not so obvious, but usually it's clearly longer than the depth of the head, whereas the lesser yellowlegs bill is similar to the depth of the head. The greater yellowlegs has kind of a heavy-chested, angular look. The lesser yellowlegs is has a delicate, kind of cute appearance, and its build is slimmer. So the two species have different vocalizations. The strident "tu-tu-tu" of the greater yellowlegs and the low doubled "tu-tu" of the lesser are distinctive. So the shapes of the birds are different, their sizes are different, the bill shapes are different, the plumages are similar, and we're not going to worry about that. In this picture in the top right, you can't really discern the paler bill base, and you can't really see much of an upsweep on this bird. And sometimes they do look straighter than other times, but the length of the bill compared to the lesser here is evident in that view. Whoops. Okay, so we'll bring in a third species here into this little view, the solitary sandpiper. Remember, also a tringa with that eye ring very prominent on the solitary. Notice the dark body coloration. Let's advance to our next slide here and consider the solitary a little further. It has that nice dark brown upper parts, not the gray, white, blackish spangled of the yellowlegs, more horizontal with that prominent eye ring. And if there's a prominence to the eye line or the supercilium on the face, it's happening in front of the bill. Okay, and the solitary also is kind of blackish here at the shoulder, this nice wash of brown across here. So along with it to consider, we have the spotted sandpiper. So we talked about the spotted's characteristic bobbing of its rear end behavior, and it's very easy to tell the breeding plumage adults with their spotted underparts. Many of the adults now still retaining spots, and in fact some birds still have their family happening, so still early enough in the year for them. But the spotted sandpiper compares to the solitary. It's a paler bird. It doesn't have the white spotting, and it has this nice spike of white coming up the side of the breast. And notice its face pattern is different than the solitary. The spotted sandpiper has a broken eye ring with a dark eye line going through front and back of the eye and a pale supercilium front and back of the eye. So a different pattern than on the solitary sandpiper. It's a little more horizontal. And when they fly, they have a characteristic, very stiff wing beat that's unique among these species. So now we'll add in another here into our more detailed look, the stilt sandpiper. And we see that the stilt sandpiper is kind of long-legged among these, proportionally long-legged. And its bill is relatively long, and it has a slight droop at the end, and that's always a distinctive feature. It has a prominent supercilium, and they kind of probe deeply into the water, much like a dowitcher does, but they don't hold their face into the water for a long time, going up and down like a dowitcher, but for shorter periods of time. But they do have to reach out their necks and stick their bill down into the water, kind of deep probing in a deep dowitcher-like manner. And often you do see them together. The stilt has a strongly patterned upper parts at this time of year, but let's focus on that bill shape. This prominent supercilium here, kind of shaggy, whatever relaxed kind of look to the back of the crown, kind of tilted forward appearance, kind of an odd proportion here with the head kind of the bill kind of seeming to pull the head forward. So with the dowitcher, the long-billed dowitcher is a little bit bigger, portly. Long-bill is characteristically very round when they're feeding in a relaxed way. They look like they have a ball inside of them. Look how round those guys are. So the dowitchers are very drably plumaged compared, say, to the stilt sandpiper. They're bigger, shorter-legged, longer bill with a yellowish base, and the bill, when they're feeding, is often held down in the water, and their face even down in the water as well. So the dowitchers are kind of distinctive. Here, a little more look at the long-billed. Of course, they have the white line going up the back is a distinctive flight feature that's unique among the two dowitchers, short-billed and long-billed. The long-billed has a rather plain plumage compared to the short-billed dowitcher, and its call note is a sharp keek, and the flocks often will be keeking away quite a bit. That's very distinctive from the tu-tu-tu of the short-billed dowitcher. So long-billed, and indeed, let's take a short detour into the short-billed dowitcher because this is a fun one to find, and we're heading right into the time of year when you can find them. So take a look, status and distribution, right? See the long-billed dowitcher in the red line, short-billed in the blue. There's a whole big part of the season when the long-billed is regular and the short-billed is not present. So if you're looking at dowitchers before, say, August, you're looking at long-bills, and if you're looking at them after, say, late September, you're pretty much looking at long bills, and this is the peak time for a short bill in the narrower window. And many of the ones we get are juvenile dowitchers. You can see there's a whole order of magnitude difference in their frequency of occurrence in the fall here. And so the short-billed is pretty sparse, but you can find them. And what you want to look for, since a lot of them are juveniles, you want to go right to the tertials. The tertials are these long feathers that look like they're maybe the wings or even the tail, but no, these are some of the flight feathers. These aren't the wingtips, rather. These are the inner set of flight feathers. Long tertials overlay the rest of the wingtip and the tail on the standing bird. And on the long-billed dowitcher, that tertial has no internal markings. It's just plain inside with a pale fringe. The short-billed dowitcher tertials have these little tiger stripes inside, so they have internal markings. So this is kind of a bird you got to look at it close or have a scope to see these kind of things, but that's a detail there with the short-billed. So last of our group, the Wilson's phalarope, an elegant, at this time of year, pale, beautiful bird. We have juveniles, we have molting adults, we have adults in basic plumage. And when you look at a flock in the distance, often it's their kind of paleness that stands out, and they're odd proportions with a small head. Notice the dark line coming back from the eye and the prominent pale face. And of course, phalaropes often swim on the water, but they also feed by wading around and up out of the water. So, and that's when they can look a little different. And so you want to be ready for that view as well. So we just had a little tour, and we're going to go right into some quizzes here and learn a little more and see what we know. So here's our first quiz in this series. And we have one that's easy. I know you know the killdeer, so we won't worry about that. But using that killdeer and whatever else we know, let's take a look at this other bird. And what do you think? Okay, so I'm not putting anything in these quizzes that we haven't at least mentioned or talked about. All right, so no total tricks. This bird is spangled above, right, with a lot of white spotting and some gray and black and all that in the mix above. And we see a straight, shorter, straight, all black bill. And so the spangling above tells us yellowlegs. That straight bill tells us lesser yellowlegs. All right, that probably wasn't too hard. The size comparison is real handy here. Now, greater yellowlegs would be significantly larger than the killdeer. I say towering, and it's not really towering, but you look at it and say, wow, that's clearly bigger than the killdeer. Here you can see they're not dissimilar. So here's another shot. Got two birds in here. One's got its face down in the water, and we can only see part of the bill and the one in the back. They're the same species. Just the feeding behavior should kind of give away probably what it is. These happen to be fairly bright individuals. And so they're kind of chunky, portly appearance with that. I can tell it's going to be a big, long bill in the way they have their face probed deep in the water, saying Dowitcher. And we just talked about an important feature. So remember where the tertials are? So here's the general upper parts of the bird. And these, kind of the back here, and there's some scapular feathers, which is kind of the shoulders. And then the wings are folded under these feathers here. The flight feathers are folded under, but laying on top is the innermost grouping. These are the tertials, these long feathers sticking out towards the rear tip of the bird. And notice they have these bright internal markings. So these indeed short-billed dowitcher. So get out there and be watching for these guys in the next few weeks. All right, so what about this? I'm realizing I forgot to mention an important part that would have been a good clue in this picture, but I'll circle around. Maybe you caught it if you're really quick on the graphs I had earlier. So this bird, in this view, we can only see part of it. There's probably enough information to tell. So it's fairly spotted, right? So, and I can tell that it's a little more than we would expect for, say, a solitary sandpiper, and the coloration is a little different. So it's a yellowlegs, and the legs are indeed bright yellow. It's standing on ice. So what do you make of that? Well, we're talking about fall shorebird migration. It's darn hot here in Colorado. We don't get any ice, but indeed, one one of the shorebirds is later than the others that is in the Yellowlegs group, and that's the greater Yellowlegs. And this photo was taken in late October in a fall frozen situation, and the only Yellowlegs left in Colorado at that time is the greater Yellowlegs. So that's a point where just the seasonality can be an important ID clue. All right, so a little tricky there, but. All right, so here we've got two sandpipers. I don't know if they're the same or not. They look a little different. They look a little similar. They're not as strongly marked as some birds that we've seen, but we would have to conclude what sort of bird so we can eliminate a lot of our species by various features and kind of zoom in. These are looking to me like Yellowlegs, and we have one species or two. They aren't as strongly marked above as some of the other images I've shown. One on the right looks a little shorter, but the bills are similar, and they both have a pale base and just a slight upsweep. And notice the kind of angular, heavy chest here, and almost like they say an Adam's apple in the throat, a little bump there. And this also has that angular quality. These are both greater Yellowlegs. And the smaller appearance here, I think, is the bird is just standing a little lower down into the water. All right, so here's one, kind of a overgrown little shoreline. And this guy doesn't have a lot of markings above. It's kind of brown without any prominent spotting. And we see a prominent eye ring that's actually divided by the eye line. So a broken eye ring, short bill with a pale base. If we were watching the bird in real life, its behavior would probably give it away as a spotted sandpiper. Okay, now this guy's not making it easy for us. Do we see enough to know what this is? So we see that, I'll let you look at it for a sec before I start talking. It's doing something, some kind of contortion. It's obviously preening or stretching or something. And we see that it's got kind of shortish, dullish yellow legs, so they're not very bright. And it looks like the bill is kind of yellowish at the base, at least, and it's probably kind of long. I mean, this is kind of foreshortened by the angle, so it's a pretty long bill. And this barring and spotting down here is going to be helpful, but we didn't really touch much on that. But just what we can see, we might discern that this is a Dowitcher. And then we don't see any prominent patterning or anything from what little we can see of the upper wings, but it's not fair to go too far with that. And indeed, this is this long-billed Dowitcher that was having a preen and stretch or whatever it was doing. And notice on this juvenile, the lack of internal markings there on the dorsal. So there's my answer, long-billed Dowitcher. All right. And so here's another image to look at. Kind of an upright bird, fairly bright yellow legs, straight bill, all dark looking. So some of those features would lead us to a Yellowlegs, maybe a lesser Yellowlegs. But the bird's rather pale and it doesn't have any spangling above, and it's got this dark eye line arcing back from the eye and the pale supercilium on a pale face and kind of portly shape. All these features taking us to Wilson's Phalarope. All right, so the quiz here is not the bird bombs that are on top of the post, but the bird that's attached to the legs there. What do you think? You may say, I don't have enough information, and indeed, this is a little of a curveball, right? So our behavior slash, I'll say habitat, but behavior is a big clue here. This bird standing on top of a fence post. Indeed, it's the upland sandpiper, which we didn't focus on, but it is a Yellowlegs bird, and you might still see one out on the prairie, but like I say, they're not too easy to find. So that's a little bit tricky, but you got to throw in the curveballs, right? All right, so we've made our way through. It has yellow legs, and I'm very grateful for everybody taking part tonight. And I'm especially grateful to the many photographers who have contributed images tonight. I've got them listed there. The photographers making their photos available for Bird Bomb so that I can put something together for us is a critical part. If you'd like to contribute, let me know. There's easy ways to do it, and I'm interested in unusual images and things that are helpful for teaching. So not just having great quality images, but other kinds of things as well are very useful. And our next, you can view past bird bombs on the DFO page. You go to the programs and past programs button, and you can see all the past bird bombs listed there to view. This one will be up in a day or two, I hope. And our next bird bombs is coming up just on August 18th. That's just 2 weeks. And we're going to focus on the little pipers, species in the genus Calidris. Now, we dealt with one of those tonight, the stilt sandpiper, but we're going to have 6 other different ones that we're going to look at to round out the size range down into the smaller group when we meet again. And these are some of the more challenging small sandpipers, so it should be fun to kind of sort them out. And again, we'll see that there are features we can use to help us get there. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop my screen share and go to Laura for any Q&A we might have.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. That was really useful, and I learned a ton.
Great.
Particularly the spangled description. I'd never heard that term before, but it really like stuck in my head. I think I'm going to be able to use it now. I was curious, you mentioned a couple of places to look for fall shorebirds were Pruitt and Jackson out on the plains. Where else should we be looking for shorebirds if I wanted to go look, say, this weekend? Where should I go?
So every year is a little different, and eBird will be a good clue if you look, for the species you're interested in. It'll clue you into places. But generally speaking, along the Front Range, you're going to look for places that have some kind of a muddy margin. So reservoirs that are pretty full aren't so good. Ones that are drawing down for the season are the ones you want to find. I know like Loggerman Reservoir in Boulder County can be really good, or places like at Cherry Creek State Park, the mouth of Cherry Creek, or at Chatfield, the mouth of the Platte, the mouth of Plum Creek. Those are the kind of places where you have fresh water coming in with mud flatty kind of situations, or a nice muddy margin where you can find the shorebirds. In terms of specific spots, I would direct people to go use eBird as a resource to really see where people are already seeing these things. And the neat thing about getting out on the prairie is you can have large numbers at these good spots. Now that makes it all the harder in some ways, but it gives you a lot more to work with. And if you're not all by yourself, and if you can handle the heat and maybe the mosquitoes, you'll survive and it'll be great.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm not the best at shorebirds, so if I wanted to go out shorebirding but not by myself, does DFO have any trips coming up?
Absolutely. I know that we'll have more than we have now because trips appear on a regular basis in our calendar. Joey Kellner has a trip at the end of August out to Pruitt and probably other places like Jackson out there, and that's always a great trip. He's a great leader, and so you can expect a lot of shorebirds there. We have a trip going to the Arsenal. There'll be some shorebirds there. We have a trip going to Bar Lake. We're hoping to find some shorebirds there. So lots of different spots have shorebirding potential within our trips, and there'll probably be some other trips that'll appear specific to looking for shorebirds as well as leaders decide to create them. So a lot of opportunities with DFO, and it's a great way to learn. We have scopes along and helpful participants. It's a really good way to go.